Absolutely not. I was in third grade classroom.
I'm going to call the meeting to order.
Oh, no teaching assistant. No. Stop. It's not because Hopkinton schools have 10 kids in the classroom.
No,
It's not live.
Yes, it said at least one person was watching.
According to the mandates, but
All right, I'm going to call the hearing to order. Mr. Vice Chair. And minute taker. Oh, that's right. Thank you. Thanks for translating.
Well, we had better than expected turnout. Yeah. And there could be online.
Okay, I'm going to call this hearing to order. It's a public hearing of the Hopkinton Community Power Committee. Not a lot of members of the public, but thank you for joining us tonight.
Maybe there's thousands online.
There could be thousands online. Anyway,
there were
thank you, sir, for coming. We're gonna start this with hopefully this working. So let's see here. It worked before.
Oh.
All right, if you would advance it, thank you.
Maybe.
Press the down arrow, hopefully. Yeah, hold on.
There we go.
Yeah, I got it now. Thank you. All right. Let's start by having members of the committee introduce themselves. I'm Mark Zankill. I'm the chair of the committee.
I'm Steve Eckberg. I'm the vice chair of this excellent committee.
And Ken Traum, I'm the select board representative.
Sarah Hoffman, member.
Sharon, no member.
I don't know why I spoke into that since there's one person here.
Is there anyone
For
on?
people online.
Are there people
Yes.
on?
Okay.
Great. Thank you to everyone on the committee for participating in this effort. So this is the agenda for tonight. We'll talk about what is community power. How does a community establish community power? We'll introduce our partner, the Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire. Talk about the implementation process and timeline, and then have some time for any questions and discussion that you may have. So what's community power? In essence, community power programs give communities the opportunity to pool or aggregate the demand of customers in their municipality. And by getting that purchasing power, they have the opportunity to lower costs and expand access to more renewable energy options, as well as some other potential energy innovations. Community power was enabled by the legislature back actually in the 90s, but then the law was updated in 2019 to make it actually more functional for communities to implement. And basically, what the legislature want to do to give communities the opportunity to have voluntary, cost-effective and local solutions for people's energy needs here in New Hampshire. So what does it really mean? If you do community power, your city or your town or your county can become the default electricity provider for residents and small businesses in your community. Right now, our default electricity provider in Hopkinton is primarily Eversource, although Unitil in a small part of town. And so Hopkinton Community Power becomes the default energy or electricity supplier. You pool your purchasing power for that energy supply. The utility company still delivers the power, and we get some community benefits, not only from hopefully lowering our energy costs, but some other benefits that we'll talk about as we go through the presentation tonight. So this is what your electricity bill looks like right now. And if you look at the upper right in the red box, it currently, if you live in Hopkinton, it would say your electricity supplier for most people is Eversource, or it might say Unitil, or if you're on third-party supplier, like some of the different competitive providers like North American Power, that you get letters in the mail from regularly, it would say their name. But for about 80% of people in town, this would say Eversource. And it has the cost of your energy supply. And then if you look further down the bill, there's the cost of delivery, which is really what you are paying to the utilities for the use of their distribution lines, for the transmission lines, and for other associated system costs. With community power, the part of this bill that changes is in the red box, which is who is your electricity supplier, and that says Peterborough here because that's the example, but that would be Hopkinton Community Power if we were to move forward. So why do you do it? There's really 4 primary drivers for community power. You've got more local control. So instead of relying on the utility to purchase power, community power really allows communities to democratize the procurement of energy and to bring that decision-making choice down to the local level. Lower costs. Everybody wants to pay less for their electricity, and community power so far has been proving itself to be able to deliver lower cost electricity to the communities that participate. More clean energy options. A lot of people would like to have more options to have more of their power come from renewable energy. And then the last piece is really just this idea of like, can we support the investment into new technologies that will deliver more of the lower cost power, local renewables, or other energy innovations that will benefit our community. And a really important point at the bottom in blue. So if we pass community power through a warrant at town meeting, that authorizes the select board to launch community power, but we will only launch community power in Hopkinton if we are able to show that we can deliver lower cost rates than the default rates provided by our local utilities. So this slide here shows a little bit about rates, and it is a little complicated, so I want to step through it. One of the nice things about community power is that you have choice, and you have lots of choices. So at the bottom, you see Eversource. And we use Eversource as our example because they are the provider for most of our residents. And the current rate for Eversource, the default rate, if you're a homeowner or a small business, is 12.582 cents per kilowatt hour. That is changing. I'll talk about that in a minute. And with that rate, you get 23.4% renewable energy content in your mix. That is what's required of the utilities under New Hampshire's renewable portfolio standard. Currently, those communities that are on community power with the Community Power Coalition, their base rate is Granite Basic, and that current rate is 10.9 cents a kilowatt hour. So about $0.015 per kilowatt hour savings. And you can see that's the same 23.4% renewable mix. However, the customers in community power could also choose one of the other power options that are in green, which are essentially higher percentages of renewable energy content, 33%, 50%, or 100%. And you can see the prices there as well. Currently, you could get 50% renewable energy at 12.3 cents a kilowatt hour, and you would still be saving money over the Eversource in comparison to the Eversource default rate. And the estimated cost column there just shows for the average residents in New Hampshire, what's your average utility bill? So with default supply right now, average based on the average use of kilowatt hours per month is about $75 a month. Currently, if you were on Community Power Coalition Granite Basic, you'd be saving about $10 a month. And then you can see as you go up in renewable energy, what the relative costs are. So if you've been watching utility prices, Eversource has lowered their rates starting February 1st. So I'm going to show you that now. The rates dropped considerably. So you can see the Eversource default rate starting February 1st will be 8.285 cents per kilowatt hour. That's good news for ratepayers. And Unitil's is 10.718 cents. Community Power Coalition has released their rates. Their Granite Basic will be 8.1 cents. So it'll still be a small savings relative to the Eversource default rate and a pretty good savings relative to Unitil. And then you can see the different higher renewable content. You can get the Granite Plus, which is 33% renewable for pretty close to the same price as the Eversource default rate. This will change again in 6 months. And I think one thing to note about the very low Eversource rate is it is about $0.0125, if I understand right, of that rate reduction is based on Eversource over collecting last year. And so it is sort of like a rebate, essentially, or a reconciliation. And I say that, I mean, that's a very low rate. And was glad to see the coalition could match that or even beat it a little bit. And the rate might stay low. Energy, there's people much smarter than I am who predict future energy prices, but there is a piece of that low rate that is perhaps unlikely to be replicated because of that $0.0125 reconciliation. Yes, Mr. Vice Chair, please.
I'm not sure that you're ready to entertain questions, but I just wanted to point out or ask a question. In the far right column here on this slide and on the last one where you have the estimated cost, and maybe you said this and I missed it, but these numbers here, for instance, the Eversource number, 8.285 cents, the $54 per month, that's just the energy portion of the customer bill, not the total customer bill. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's the energy supply part of the customer bill. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
And you can see at the bottom, it's based on 650 kilowatt hours per month. So that'd be about, what is that, 7,800 kilowatt hours a year, which is, I think that is sort of like
Ballpark.
the ballpark average. We use more than that at my house. But yes,
So we average out.
thank you. Good for you.
Use less than half of that.
Oh, you were awesome.
You're in Texas all the time. Mark.
Oh, yes, sir, please.
So now that you brought it up, there's a separation between supply cost and energy cost, as I understand it.
There's separation between supply and transmission in essence. Yeah.
So if we go with community power and I make my choice there, would I have an additional bill for transmission or would that vanish somehow?
No, you wouldn't have it. Well, you would have, your bill would look more or less the same. It would, your bill, if you're on Eversource today, your bill would still come from Eversource. It would look exactly the same, except
Go back to the other
that
side. Yeah.
in that upper right portion, it would, instead of your electricity supplier is Eversource, it would say your electricity supplier is Hopkinton Community Power, and it would have our rate there. The rest of it would be exactly the same. So your transmission costs, your delivery, everything that's under delivery there, that's going to be the same. Yeah, you're just going to have a different supplier and we believe a lower rate for the supply. Yeah, thanks for that question. Yeah, we can be informal. Just stop me along the way. So what are the steps to establishing Hopkinton Community Power? The select board has to appoint an energy aggregation committee, which is also called a community power committee, and the select board did that in July. And then we needed to register our committee with the Public Utilities Commission, which we did in August. Then we got the account and load data. So load is like a jargony term for energy use. From the utilities, we requested and got that from both Eversource and Unitil in the late summer. And then you draft what's called your electric aggregation plan or your community power plan. We have done that. We released a draft in late November. That's up on our website. And by the way, if anyone's listening online, there's lots of information on, you can just Google Hopkinton Community Power Committee. We have a web page hosted on the town website with all this information on it. And then we are required to convene 2 public hearings. This is the second of those hearings. And then with the select board's blessing, we will place the community power warrant article on the town meeting ballot in March. If that warrant article is approved, then the launch has several steps. We first have to select an energy supplier. So we have been partnering with the Community Power Coalition to support us in this journey. We're very appreciative. They've been incredibly helpful. However, there are other energy supplier partners. There are brokers out there. And so the select board would ultimately, we will make a recommendation to the select board, and the select board will ultimately have the decision on whether to launch and who our supplier, who our partner supplier essentially would be. We also need to submit our final electric aggregation plan to the PUC for their approval. We hope to do that later this month because it will take a couple months. And then with any luck, we will launch in the summer or perhaps the fall. It will depend upon the cycle of being able to bring our community into the next tranche of purchasing by our power broker or supplier. So just a little bit about like what actually happens if we launch. So at least 30 days before, everybody who is on default supply will get a letter in the mail, and it will say Hopkinton Community Power is launching. Here is the energy rate for the initial period, and it will compare it to whoever your default supplier is at that time. If you do nothing, you are enrolled. So it is an automatic opt-in, essentially, or a default opt-in. If you want to stay with your whoever your current supplier is, you can opt out through the mail or online or through a phone call. There'll be different ways where you can opt out. Eversource or Unitil still delivers your electricity. It's their poles and their wires. They still will provide the billing services. They still respond to power outages and ensure that essentially the power gets delivered to your door. And if you're in, you can exit whenever you want. You just have to give 30 days. If you notify that you want to exit community power and go back to your default supplier, you notify Hopkinton Community Power, and on the next billing cycle, you'll be returned to your default supplier. So lots of choice. I mentioned most of these already, but again, most customers will be automatically enrolled unless they opt out. There are some exceptions to that. If you're on third-party supply, if you're on one of those competitive third-party suppliers, you are not automatically enrolled. You would have to choose to opt in. And if you are currently net metered, you are not automatically enrolled. And we can talk more about that. So it's voluntary. You can opt out at any time, like I said. Utilities still do their thing. And this last point, it's self-funded, so there's no taxes used to cover the expenses of this program. All the costs of running the program are covered through the supply rate. So there's no additional, there will be no warrant article or no addition to the town budget, no additional sort of cost, just savings.
And if I could make a point, I think that that is actually in the statute, which enables community power aggregation. It's not merely a promise from some committee. It is in
It's
statute.
required,
Yes.
right?
I think an important point for lots of folks who, don't want more costs to build up from other new programs and things. So I think that's a good point to make.
Thank you, Steve. By the way, Andrew, we're relying on you to let us know if we go off the rails anywhere here.
Great.
So we have to create this thing called an electric aggregation plan, which is a very wonky term. We just want to touch on that real quickly. So again, this committee was appointed with the charge to develop the EAP. It essentially lays out how will Hopkinton Community Power operate, what we will do to make sure we comply with state rules and regulations, what our goals are. That should say this is the second of 2 public hearings to ask for input. So again, the EAP, it defines the goals and objectives of our community power. It talks about governance and implementation, and it basically says we're going to comply with the rules of the road. What it doesn't do is commit the town to actually implement community power. And that's still going to be a decision first at the warrant town meeting and then of the select board. And again, there's no financial commitment or liability on the town itself or the taxpayers. I'm not going to go through all this in detail, but I just, this is sort of what the outline of the plan looks like. It's good bedtime reading. But the 2 sections in green, I'll have a couple of slides on, which is the stuff that's really relevant to Hopkinton. Let me start with this one. This just lays out the number of accounts. It's kind of small, so I'll just highlight a couple of things. The top is Eversource, and there are a total of 3,285 Eversource customer accounts or people in Eversource territory, let's put it that way, in Hopkinton who have accounts. Of those, 2,600 are on Eversource default supply, and 680 have chosen third-party or competitive suppliers. So about 80% are on default supply, 20% are on competitive supply. And then below you can see Unitil, much smaller. We've got 96 customers in Unitil territory, 81 are on default and 15 are on competitive. So similar percentages.
Do we have any GV rate commercial, like larger commercial facilities, like McLean's or?
I'm sure we do have GB rate facilities. So these are only because community power will not apply to those. We only got the load data for G-class.
Would not apply. I was just looking at Dover's and they are included.
come up to the microphone with this.
That would be great if you wouldn't mind coming up to the microphone and just introduce yourself so members of the public can know who you are.
Good evening. My name's Andrew Patch. I'm the outreach coordinator for the coalition, and thank you for inviting me along tonight to your public hearing. Just to speak a little bit to what was mentioned there, GB rates. GB is what would be described as a mid-sized account, mid-sized business account, commercial account for Eversource. And in fact, they will be enrolled in this. They don't get broken out on the initial aggregation request. This is a sort of rough and ready information just to give some scope to the town to be able to do some back of the envelope math to figure out what kind of load profile the town would be procuring. As you move towards launching community power, there's going to be a lot more detailed data coming from the utilities to provide you with what you need to launch. But GB customers are, if they are on default, and there's not probably a high proportion of them, because most medium and certainly large size commercial customers have already procured their power through a third-party supplier. But the GB folks, if they are on default, are on a monthly rate. So they are treated differently by the coalition in terms of how their rates are calculated. And in fact, I did share.
You did.
There is a rate card that goes along with the general rates that you showed tonight that explains how that works. And interestingly enough, with Eversource, the reconciliation which yielded this very low rate for residential and small business is actually inverted for those GB customers, and they are actually receiving I think it's actually 1.5 cents increase on their rates that they would normally be paying with Eversource. And so consequently, although in this 6-month rate cycle, residential customers are going to only benefit from a 2% discount in the Eversource rate, commercial customers will get something in the region of 32% savings. So, and they are often larger users, so that's quite a significant amount.
Thank you. Thank you for asking that, Sharon. And that's
I was
good to
looking at
understand.
Dover's community power, they're ahead of us.
Yeah.
And they have all the GV rates laid out, and it's like, I don't see anything like.
I
that
will
there.
forward that. Andrew sent me that recently. I didn't put that in the slide deck, but I will forward that to
Okay.
I'll include that in what goes to committee for the
I
next
did
day.
actually give handouts that do have.
Yeah, they're up,
Oh, great. Thank you.
Chair.
Does that need to go under this in the EAP?
Like in this, you
Yeah,
know,
like the next, like another bar down, a little bar, a table down from that, should we be? including
Andrew,
that?
should we be including, so when we requested, I mean, Henry gave us the template to request the load data. We did not get GV
No,
customer data,
they-
load
you
data.
may get
Okay.
Eversource.
Do we need to include anything like that in our electric aggregation plan, is Sarah's question?
No, in fact, the coalition's template doesn't include the aggregate data, and it is a step in the process of moving towards community power. But it's not a mandatory component of your energy aggregation plan. And as I just said, it's a sort of rough and ready figure that we just use to compare once you do get into the multi-profile to make sure that the data that we first saw sort of correlates to the information that we get with the next phase. But it is, as I said, each utility does it a different way. So I wouldn't overanalyze things too deeply. Sometimes from Eversource, I'm in the process of reviewing your energy aggregation plan. I will be looking at these numbers and how they were achieved. I see things like, you only get 11 months of data for residential and 12 for the other one. And so I do analyze this to make sure it's representative of what you're paying. But the only thing really it's going to be looking at is the total load profile of the utility default supply customers. That's what's pretty interesting.
The 15 million kilowatt hours, you mean, and
Yes.
for Eversource, and the 690 for, yeah.
So if you think about that, even at 0.1% change savings, it comes out with a lot of 0.1s and 15 million. And I often give presentations basically doing the reverse math, say that for every penny that you save on over a default rate, you can do the math of how much in aggregate the town will benefit across all of its customer base, which is quite a significant amount.
So Andrew, just a full circle, PUC does not require us to have the GV data in our plan to
No.
be approved.
No.
Okay.
And just to follow up on the handout that we're just given the for the Eversource GV rate for the 6 months starting February 1, the average rate is 11.835 cents per kilowatt hour, whereas for community power, it's 8.10.
Yeah. And Andrew, just to use your math that you just gave us, so if our town uses 15 million, we'll add those two together actually. So we'll say 16 million kilowatt hours a year in residential and small business. And if we saved a penny a kilowatt hour, right, that would be $160,000 a year. And I think we'll save more than that, but at a conservative penny a kilowatt hour, that's 160,000 a year of savings for the community or for residents and small businesses. If when we add in the GV, it'll be a little bit more. Great. Committee's asking some awesome questions tonight. This is the other piece around in the plan that we spent some time on, which is what are our objectives for Hopkinton Community Power? And so we started with lower rates, and then we also included expanded choices for renewable energy, fiscal stability and financial reserves. We can talk more about that, but part of the way the Community Power Coalition operates is baked into the rate is money to support a reserve that the coalition uses to help ensure rate stability over time, and so they can continue to competitively price their power. We can add our own additional reserve if we want and bake that into our rates. We haven't talked about that as a committee yet. Consumer protections, again, freedom of choice is really important. You can choose whether or not to participate. You can choose your power plan. And then supporting more local renewable clean power. I just want to spend a little bit about our process to select a partner. So there are two models right now for community power, calling them partners. There are private brokers who broker energy for communities and schools and many small and larger governmental entities. And then there is a nonprofit power agency, which is the Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire, that was formed to help advance community power in the state. So our committee spent some time in the summer comparing our choices, and we looked at the set of criteria: rate history, rate stability, termination provisions, how easy is it to get out, what kind of a service and assistance they provided, the governance and transparency, and what we overall community benefit. We met with representatives of Standard Power, which is one of the brokers, and also with the coalition. We did some reference checks, and then we presented our recommendation to the Board of Selectmen, which was to join the Community Power Coalition at the very least for the planning stages and potentially to continue. We felt like both choices were good. Actually, we think the private brokers are doing a really good job, and they would have been good partners as well. But we were swayed by the rate history, the rate stability and flexibility, easier termination, and then really the governance and transparency piece. So the Community Power Coalition is a nonprofit. They have a nonprofit board that is made up of members of constituent communities. They have a variety of active committees that are made up of representatives of constituent communities. There's a lot of transparency in all the financials and the decisions that they make. And we felt that was more in line with where we wanted to go. And this is a map of communities that are either already in that are in and operating in green, in and launching this spring in blue, or spring or summer or maybe fall, and that includes Hopkinton and then those that have just started the planning process in red. What's striking to me is if you looked at this map 6 months ago, there was a lot fewer colors on it. So the coalition is growing quickly. And I think a year from now, you'll see more color than white on this map, I suspect, at least for organized communities. This is like a kind of a wonky slide, but I appreciated Andrea providing it. And there's a lot of action on this slide, so I'm just going to point out a couple of things. What this slide tries to show is how are community powers rates faring over the course of the past year relative to the 4 utilities in New Hampshire. And I'm not sure what broker has been used here, but at least maybe the average of private brokers. And so Community Power Coalition's rates are in green, and you can see they started up at about 16 cents, where they were lower than Eversource, Liberty, and Unitil, a bit higher than, I think if I'm reading this right, a bit higher than New Hampshire Electric Cooperative. Then starting when the rates changed in August, the coalition not only beat all 4 utilities and were just a little bit below what brokers had been charging. And then you can see the rate change starting in February when Eversource's rates dropped precipitously. And you can see that the coalition has dropped to essentially match or slightly, as Andrew said, by 2% beat those rates. So this is the track record so far. Track record is pretty good. And you can see here, I think one thing that this chart illustrates to me is the difference between the coalition model and the private broker model. So the brokers, the contracts that they are doing with communities are typically 24 to 36 months. They try to get you a really great rate, and that rate might turn out to be really great, or it might not, because you don't know what the utilities are going to do every 6 months. In this case, the rate was pretty good for the first 6 months, or pretty good for the first year, I guess I would say. And then it's going to be higher than the utility rates for the next 6 months. The coalition's model is different. They're purchasing power with greater, I guess, frequency, and pooling different communities at different times, and aiming to meet or beat the utility rates over time. So it's just a different model. This is a slide that I asked Henry to present last time, but I'm going to try to present it, and Andrew, you can you can chime in. So I think the 2 most obvious benefits to community power are lower rates and more renewable energy choices. Sorry, there's something right in the middle of it, but this talks a little bit about the reserves. So again, community power baked into the rates is funding a reserve that is intended to support ongoing savings, rate stability for customers. And so when Community Power Coalition looked at what's the value they delivered to communities in their first 8 months of operation, there was 10 million in electricity savings, but there was also 10 million in reserves that were set aside that again can support those longer term rate stability and savings over time. So I think the point of this is the value you get in your community is not just the immediate electricity rate savings, but also this reserve that can help to ensure that rate stability and savings over time. Almost done here. Next steps. This is the last of our public hearings. We've got a survey up right now. You can access it on our website, and it will be up. I can't remember the date. I think I said for another week.
Yeah, something like that.
But look on the website. It shows, and we've put it on the Hopkinton official Facebook page. We've put it on the unofficial Hopkinton Facebook page, and we've also sent it out in Susan Covert's emails. And we'll probably do one more round of that outreach to give an opportunity for input. We'll make some revisions as needed to the electric aggregation plan based on that feedback. And also we've given it to the coalition to put their more technical eyes on it. We'll submit that to the PUC and then we will go to town meeting. This is not necessarily the warrant article, but this is an example of a warrant article. And then I was looking at the results. I was looking at what's come in on the survey so far of the 120 approximately respondents, which is excellent. What were some of the, one of the questions we asked was, we've put together an FAQ. You can access it on the website. What questions do you have that you want to make sure we're asking? And so I pulled a few that came up repeatedly that I thought were good. So is it mandatory? No. Do I have to participate? No, you will be automatically opted in if you're on default service, but you can opt out before launch or at any time after launch. Will it impact outage service? Nope. The utilities still have the full responsibility to maintain the lines and respond during any kind of outage. And I think inherent in that question is like, will the utility care less about us if we're on community power? And what the utilities say is no, that they are agnostic about where you get your energy supply because that is not how they make money. They make money building and maintaining transmission infrastructure. Primarily, that's how they make money. They don't make money off the supply. So, and they are obligated as regulated utilities to maintain those transmission and distribution lines and to respond to outages. So we shouldn't see any change in service whatsoever. What happens if I have solar and I net meter? So this is one piece of community power that's not, I would say one piece of the puzzle that's not in place yet. The statute provides for community power to include solar and net metered customers and to provide those net metering benefits. However, there is an ongoing, I guess, issue between the community power providers and the utilities on accessing the data that they need, the net metering data that they need in order to actually provide net metering customers with those benefits. They have not worked that out yet. Sounds like it's in process. And I think we would hope that net metered customers will be able to join community power and receive those benefits in the not too distant future. Right now, they would be opted out automatically. Although if you are net metered and you want to join community power, you can. It depends on your use. You might still decide it's beneficial based on how much energy you produce and what you use, but you would be opted out until they get this resolved. And please, Andrew.
Well, thank you, Mark. That's absolutely accurate. I just wanted to sort of explain a couple of things about and in the Hopkinton community power aggregation plan. It is a fairly comprehensive section about net metering. It's the intention of the coalition to recognise net metering as a very important component because everybody that produces power on a roof or locally through microhydro or something and exports to the grid, every kilowatt hour that is produced is a kilowatt hour that Hopkinton community power does not have to procure from elsewhere. So we recognise that value. Net metering is an ongoing conversation between the utilities and the Public Utility Commission about what is a fair reimbursement methodology. Net metering 1.0, which is what most people who had solar and other forms of net metered supply, they were on net metering 1.0 until 2017 when net metering 2.0 came in. And the change is fairly material because 1.0 gets a full credit against any of those distribution charges. So I'm a 1.0 customer. All I pay Eversource every month is for their basic customer fee, $13-14 a month.
Lucky.
I pay $1 a month for a good neighbor fee as well.
Generous.
But on top of that, or joking apart, every year I get a credit letter from Eversource, and it gives me an option to either roll my credits on each year or to cash in at a discount rate to the current retail rate of electricity. Net metering 2.0 works slightly differently. There is a percentage of the distribution rate that you are now still responsible for, and there's a different methodology for reimbursement. And in both cases, the coalition would definitely like to see a more advantageous recognition of the benefit of supply. So, without going into more detail about that, it's just an important cornerstone of community power that it will be our intention to reimburse as generously as possible those people that decide to move forward with solar. So we will not be discouraged. I've been told we are hoping to resolve this issue, which is purely a billing issue. The technology exists, the metering records the activity we need the data from, but the utilities have not been in a position to provide that data so far for us to provide reimbursement. But they have been informed by the Public Utilities Commission that they are obligated to do so, and they need to get into compliance as fast as possible. And so we're hoping that this might be resolved in months rather than years.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew, for expanding upon that.
Actually, Mark. Andrew, was Unitil further along in that process?
Simply put, yes.
Mhm.
Each utility has a different approach to the billing process. I used to have a business in Hopkinton, and I was a Unitil commercial customer, and I remember one day I just got back and we got a new meter. Well, it can't have been less than 10 years ago, and it was a meter that would be able to provide me with what's known as interval data, i.e. time of use, and I thought things were going to change. So they put them in a long time ago, they just never actually leveraged that technology so far. But they have the back end to do it too. So I'm led to believe that Unitil hasn't got to go to such expense and time and effort to get in compliance as Eversource does. Eversource has definitely got a bigger challenge, and obviously they're the biggest of the utilities. So they're the people we're really talking to. Liberty has already taken steps to provide time of use rates to some of its customers in the Upper Valley. So they are definitely the leader of the three regulated utilities. And then the co-op that does operate in a somewhat different fashion is definitely has been a long-time component of this, and we're definitely on the same page with them. We are enrolling customers from the co-op now. As your chart earlier said, when the first launch happened, April, May of last year, the co-op rates were actually lower than the initial launch. But since then, the coalition rates have tracked lower. Although the co-op is not a regulated utility in the same fashion as the other three, they are a non-profit and they can procure power at a different schedule than the other utilities. But they still are a distribution utility. It's still the only money they make is on holding wires and distribution. The electric supply charge is still a pass-through. And I just wanted to touch on that a little bit clearer. Mark sort of touched on this earlier, but as the regulation that happened in the 1990s was intended, but by 2023, the majority of customers should not be receiving the default power from the regulated utility. It was never the intention of that law. But because it was an opt-in, one by one process, it really hadn't gained the traction that was anticipated. But the law and the role of the utilities has been the same all along. This idea that Eversource buys power and passes it through, means there's no profit motive for them to do anything more than their minimum requirements by law. So what happens is what happened last year. If there's a perfect storm on that one day in the calendar when they procure power in December, it's a bad day for everybody for 6 months. And that's why your rates went up to 20.2 cents a kilowatt hour for 6 months last year. The coalition can definitely weather those sort of extreme circumstances much better because of procurement process. But the more important thing to bear in mind is this concept of a non-profit, because in that rate is the cost of procuring power, the cost of running the coalition, and then the rest of it we call headroom. But if we were a for-profit company, that would be profit. But that is cycled back to the benefit of member communities. It is together as community reserves to start with, because job one is to make sure that we can maintain rates. We didn't have to dig into reserves to get the 8.1 cents to beat the Eversource. But I know that we did forego some anticipated reserves in 2024 in terms of making that number, because it's just the basic math where, you know, the cost of power is and the cost of running the coalition, the headroom will be impacted by an 8.1 rate. But it's only a temporary situation, and then it will continue to accrue. Our goal is to reach 120 days cash on hand. When we get to that point, we will be an extremely robust organization from a creditworthiness perspective, and we can procure power at the most advantageous rates. And that's our first goal.
Where are you towards that? Where are you towards 120 days now?
So the interim 60 days, and we put a goal of doing that in 3 years. We've already got into that ballpark within the first year of operation. And we set a 5-year goal to 120 days, and we're sincerely anticipating that to be met in 3 years rather than 5.
Thank you.
Once we get past that point, those reserves may well be in excess, and they may well be available to the member communities to
Return.
interesting projects.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple other quick questions. Would this increase taxes? No. Will this show up in the town budget? No. And then the last one we just talked about, Eversource just lowered its rates. Will it still save us money and a little?
Somebody could raise their hand online.
Oh, they did? Oh,
Bonnie
all
Christie.
right. We're gonna hang on. If you're online and you have a question, if you wouldn't mind just sitting tight for a couple minutes to get through the last slide, and then we can have more public comment. It'll be easier for us on the technological side to bring you over. There we go. That's the last one. Why don't you come up to the mic, and while you do that, I'm going to go and see if I can get this to Lynn, if you're able to. Take a little doing. Would you just say your name and address?
Sure, my name is Scott Smith, and I live at 31 Lilac Lane. I'd like to start by saying thanks. Thanks, it looks like excellent work and an excellent presentation, and it looks like an excellent opportunity. My only concern is that I generally believe there's no free lunch. And when you have an opportunity to say things like this, often involve some degree of risk. With everything I've seen and the opportunity to opt in and opt out on a regular basis, I have that reflected in the next billing cycle. And with it, by law, not being able to impact town expenses, I'm at a loss to see what the worst case scenario here is. But can you explain to me what the worst case scenario would be for in town scenario?
Yeah, I mean, I can try to do that and certainly would invite anyone on the committee. So this is a great question. What's the worst case scenario? With the coalition, if we go with the coalition, I guess to me, the worst case scenario is the coalition the utility default rates beat what the coalition is able to offer. And so we have people in town who, for some period of time, are paying more than they would have if they were on default supply until, of course, they will be notified and they'll have the opportunity. So, in theory, the worst case is you have 1 month in which you're paying a higher rate. Presumably that's more than offset by all the time you've paid lower rates. But that's one scenario, I guess, that I couldn't, it could happen, right? The coalition is set up and structured to try to have that not happen. And that's partly why the reserve is in place, but it could, right? I mean, the coalition hasn't been operating that long. And so I think there's an operating model and a premise that suggests that won't happen, but it could.
It's with one month higher rates, with the ability to opt in, opt out at any time. Don't see that as a major risk.
Yeah, I mean, I think we would agree. And that's what's appealing about it, is that you can always go back to default supply anytime you want.
And I can opt in and opt out just by going to the website, right?
Yeah, or calling a phone number. And the timing, so if you do it in advance of the meter read, they'll be able to switch you, at the next meter read. But if the timing's off a little bit, it might be that 30-day wait period. But other than that, there's no problem. You can do it, as far as I could read, as many times as you want. The coalition might get a little tired of dealing with you, but I don't see any reason why you can't switch back and forth to, keep the rates as low as possible for yourself. There is free lunch.
As long as you pay.
You're working for your free lunch, as
Well, yeah.
long as you pay your bill. Yeah. Thank you for that question. Bonnie, we're gonna, if you unmute yourself, you are on.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted.
We can hear you.
Okay, this was a great presentation. I really appreciate it. I missed the first one. So this is very helpful in that it's recorded so it's obviously complicated, but now I can go back and look at this stuff and think about it some more. So thank you very much for this. I actually have 4 questions. Is that all right?
Yes, my only request is ask them one at a time and let us answer them so we don't
Yeah.
have to remember all 4.
Okay, so my first question is, if I understand how this will work, I'm thinking of what does this mean for me as an individual? What I currently do is when I remember, I check the market and try to adjust my supplier so that I'm getting the best rate I can for the highest percentage of green energy that I can. So right now I'm getting my supplier is Direct Energy. So does this mean that I will know as an individual, I will no longer have to do that research if I opt in or I'm automatically enrolled in community power, that this is creating a group that will do that for me and get the best rate for me? Is that correct?
I guess a couple of things I would say. So one, if you are on a third-party supplier when we launch, you won't be automatically enrolled in community power. You can choose to enroll in, you can opt in, but only those who are on default supply will be automatically enrolled, Bonnie, but you could choose to. That's not the crux of your question, but I just want to make that clear.
Okay.
So with community power, if we went with the coalition, they offer these 4 different, currently are offering, 4 different energy supply mixes with the basic rate, which would be I think our default rate, equivalent to the 23.4% renewables, and then the plus the 33.4, the 50 and 100. So you would have those rates available to you, and you would have, I mean, they will be readily available. They're updated every 6 months. And so you could choose over time if you wanted to switch between those rates. I think it's probably fair to say, I mean, that is part of what the coalition is doing. They have energy buyers, and this is what they are doing on behalf of communities, as are private brokers, to try to find the best mix at the best price. So they are doing that work for you. What I don't think we could say is that they will always beat in every energy mix all the competition out there. You know, you might find a better deal from direct energy at some point in time at some rate class. But they will be doing this work to try to offer us the best mix at the best price.
Oh, okay.
Ken, did you want to add something?
Oh, I was actually going to ask Bonnie, when I'm looking at what community power would be having as a rate for 100% renewable power as of February 1 will be 12.4 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, what are you paying now?
Generation service charge, that's the correct thing to look at. Is that right? It's almost 10 cents per kilowatt hour, and I can't remember, it's some mix of renewable energy, but I can't remember. It's not 100%.
Yeah, so you'll be able to compare, you know, when we launch, you'll get a rate sheet and you'll be able to compare what you're paying now to what the rates will be in the upcoming cycle. And then you can determine, is it a good, is it the right deal for you? Andrew.
Yes, sir. Just, yes, to reiterate, obviously our rates currently are set on the same track as the utilities every 6 months. I'm not sure about your relationship with the third-party supplier, but often these are longer-term commitments that you're being asked to make than the 6-month rate. So that's something to bear in mind. I wanted to point out that it isn't a requirement that the coalition matches these rates on a 6-monthly cycle, and it's very much in prospect that the coalition will introduce other rate options, including longer option terms in due course. We haven't launched for a year yet, so we need to sort of walk before we can run. And the third point to bear in mind is, over time, some engaged communities may leverage the coalition to either themselves or in combination with other neighboring communities develop local renewable generation that they will benefit from independently of the coalition rate, and maybe even beat, if you want, the default rate of the coalition and have a higher mix of renewables. So this is all in play for the future. The final thing I wanted to make clear is that the coalition, as with every other power supplier in the state of New Hampshire, is required to publish rates on an apples-for-apples comparison basis at the New Hampshire Department of Energy website. So I'm sure if you have already been keeping an eye on these things, you're familiar with that. And the coalition rates are published on that site along with all the other third parties.
Thanks, Andrew.
Okay.
All right, number 2.
It's actually very hard to hear the input from people at the microphone. So I miss a lot of that. But anyway, so number 2, I guess this builds on number 1, but to an extent, I'm more interested in supporting renewable energy than I am at getting the lowest cost. I mean, I'm willing to pay a little bit more if I can have a higher mix of renewables. So how do my preferences get handled by this? Does community power prioritize? It sounds like you're talking about a mix, but you don't prioritize lower cost or renewable power. It's trying to get a mix of both. Is that right?
There are currently 4 different choices that are offered to community power customers, Bonnie, and so each one has a different renewable energy content, right? With the basic is comparable to the utility default supply, which is 24.3%, and that's tied to the renewable portfolio standard, what's required. That's the lowest rate. And then there is a 33% renewable, a 50% and 100% clean energy with corresponding rates. So I think the answer to your question is you have the choice. The consumer has a choice. You can decide based on your budget and your values where you want to land within those options.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense. I get it. Okay, number 3. When I look at my energy bill, and you already talked about this, I pay a lot more for the delivery, the transmission cost, than I pay for the actual power. Is that ever going to change? And maybe I couldn't really hear clearly, but maybe Andrew just touched on this. If we have more renewable power locally available, is it possible to get that supplied at a lower cost because it's local, to cut down not only the power source cost, but the delivery charge cost?
Yeah, I mean, certainly invite you to Andrew to comment. So
Steve's ready to
Steve, you ready to comment? Oh, please.
This is Steve Eckberg. I would say, in short, I think the answer is no. The cost of maintaining the poles and wires and the distribution and transmission system is not going to get cheaper as long as we're here consuming power. But obviously, you said, is the distribution portion of your bill ever going to get cheaper than the energy portion of the bill? Well, I suppose it could be an unfortunate situation where the energy portion gets so large that it's upside down that way, but I don't think that's the answer you're looking for. So.
Okay,
The only thing I would add is that, as Andrew said, and sorry you couldn't hear, we didn't have the mic on properly. One of the things the coalition is trying to do over time is to support the development of more local renewable energy. And a New Hampshire Department of Energy study that was done and completed last year shows that if we have more distributed renewable energy in our state, we will lower peak demands, which means that over time, that should slow the rate of additional pole and wire work. So it will not make your distribution costs lower than they are today, but it will hopefully reduce the increases over time if we have more local renewable energy. And it's something the coalition is going to, I think, as Andrew said, going to try to help support over time.
Okay, thank you. All right, that kind of builds into my last question, which is not just relevant to your committee, but really to the whole town. I'm on the Conservation Commission, and we just did a natural resource inventory, and it shows that Hopkinton is 70% forested. So I look at that and I think, wow, we should really prioritize holding on to all that forested land as much as possible, not just for our publicly owned land, but privately as well, and encourage that because of the carbon sequestration value that, typically people think about the value of the forests in board feet and lumber that can be extracted. But it just struck me that, my gosh, we have this incredible resource here to sequester carbon, which is more and more beginning to have value in the economy. So I thought about that. And then I'm also on the Waste Reduction Committee, and we're talking a lot about what to do about recycling and waste management at the transfer station. And it was proposed in 2014 that we go to a curbside pickup for the whole town. And I think about that and I think, wow, I mean, if we just had one truck going to all the houses and picking everything up and taking it away, would that be better from a carbon standpoint than everybody driving to the transfer station every weekend with their recyclables? Because even if you get your trash picked up, you're still going there for your recyclables. So I'm just thinking about, okay, as we make a policy decision in the town about the transfer station, are we thinking in terms of carbon emissions and climate change? So from a conservation commission perspective and a waste perspective, and now working with community power, I'm just like, how can we work together as a town with all our committees saying, you know, how do we maximize all the advantages that we can get for mitigating climate change? So that's just sort of the thought piece, I guess. And Ken, you're on the select board, and Mark, you're on
Yeah.
the committee, and there's a lot of different people here. And it just seems like we all ought to be having a community conversation about climate change and all the opportunities we have to address it here. That's it.
Thanks, Bonnie.
Yeah, one of the drivers behind looking at community power type option is to have more renewable options more easily that can be achieved by residents. So in that sense, yes, I think this is, moving in the same direction as you are suggesting. But beyond that, I think your comments are beyond the scope of this committee's responsibilities.
Yes, I agree. I'm just hoping to, start a conversation about that. And Sabrina has talked about strategic government on the select board, and that's kind of a strategic government idea about, instead of us all in our silos in our committees, then what is our purview? How can we work together for synergistic benefits? So just a thought
Thanks, Bonnie.
piece.
Okay.
Thank you. If anybody else who is online wants to ask a question, just use the raise hand function and we can let you in. Wait a few more seconds.
Do you want to play the Final Jeopardy song to do the countdown?
Okay,
I have one
please.
question. And it's more of a clarification. I believe the systems benefit charge that pays for New Hampshire Saves energy efficiency incentives is on the delivery side of the bill. So
Yes.
that will not be impacted, right?
Right, thanks. That's a question that has come up. It came up at Rotary too. So yeah, if you are interested in any of essentially the programs that are offered by our utilities for energy efficiency or for low moderate income electric billing support, those are all untouched by this.
As are the incentives that are offered through the Department of Energy for renewable investments in your home. If you wanted to put solar on your home or business, or invest in a renewable heating system, wood chips, wood pellets, that sort of thing, those are all unimpacted by this potential change in the energy supply. Yeah.
Great. Anything else tonight? Well, I thank you all for tuning in, and we will close the public hearing. And please, if you haven't done the survey, get on the Community Power website, and you can find the link there. We would love to get your input and stay in touch.
Thanks.
Mark.